Addiction. A word that sends shivers down our spines. But what really drives it? Is it just brain chemistry, or is there more to the story? Is it just a modern-day plague, solely caused by purposelessness, degradation of values, and experimentation? Or is there a sinister force at play? Each episode of Detox will take you on a journey into the dark underbelly of addiction as we expose the shocking truths and even the hidden drivers that are fueling this chronic disease. Addiction is a stealthy predator. It's masquerading as a harmless pleasure before it strikes with a devastating consequence. It's a condition where individuals become trapped in a vicious cycle of craving and use, driven by substances or even behavior that's hijacked the brain's reward system and holds them hostage. Addiction is also a chronic disease that's affecting the brain, causing compulsive behavior despite the consequences. It's not a moral failing or a personal choice, but a real medical condition that requires comprehensive treatment. Can you picture being trapped in a cycle of craving and use, even when you know the effects on your life or even your loved ones? That is the reality of millions of people who are struggling with addiction. But here's the thing. Addiction is not just about brain chemistry. It's also about social and environmental factors like trauma, poverty, and relationships. And that's why a comprehensive approach to treatment is necessary, addressing individual and societal factors. And did you know that men and women experience addiction differently? Research is showing that women are more likely to get hooked on drugs and struggle with relapse. In fact, women are 50% more likely to relapse after treatment than men. Females are more likely to get hooked on drugs like cocaine, heroin, and nicotine. High estrogen levels can actually increase the pleasurable effects of drugs, leading to a faster spiral into addiction. Animal studies have actually shown that estrogen can actually increase drug-seeking behavior. Men and women clearly react differently to drugs, both in how they behave and how their brain works. And scientists now think that hormones like estrogen might be a part of the reason for some of these differences. And for us to understand a little bit more about helping people overcome addiction, we want to learn more about how then we can actually tailor treatment to some of these differences. And by understanding these sex differences, we can actually develop more effective treatments and support systems for individuals struggling with addiction. This is also just suggesting that women are more likely to struggle with relapse. Meanwhile, did you know that the theme for the Pan-African Women's Day 2024 is looking at investing in women, accelerating progress? So we want to figure out this morning how investing in women can actually accelerate progress in addiction treatment and recovery, whether it's education, whether it's to gender equality. How does empowering our women lead to better outcomes for all? It's Detox. Good morning. Welcome. And as always, we have such, if I can say, deep conversations about addiction as to try and understand what exactly this thing we're fighting is all about. And I know for the most time, it's been easier to label people battling with addiction as criminals, as delinquents. But I'm hoping by now you're starting to gain a different perspective as we try to uncover the truth about what this mental illness, what this sickness is all about. Joining me this morning in studio for us to actually go deep into this particular discussion, Joining us online is Mirtha Nyamande. He's a psychotherapist. He's also a member of the National Task Force Committee, and he's important to this discussion as we also try to connect the discussions we have with the bigger plan that we as a country have in fighting addiction. Joining me in studio, as always, Dr. Dewa is here. He is the founder of International Wellness Center. It's a naturopathic drug and substance abuse rehab center. So we can actually call him a specialist in rehabilitation. I'm also equally excited to have Tendai, who's been missing for a while. Tendai Phil Daka, I like to call him TPD. He's also a social worker who also helps us working on a day-to-day scale with people who are battling addiction. And I'm also excited to introduce recovery coach Edmo Chikore, who's also here, and they come from Batira Pamwe, which is also a recovery center. Good morning and welcome. I'm so excited to have you all in studio. I'm going to start off right into this discussion, and I'm going to throw this question right at you, Doc. Looking into this discussion we want to have this morning, the differences that may actually be happening as far as gender is concerned with substance abuse. Are men and women's brains, Dr. Dewa, different to this extent, if at all? Good morning.
Good morning to the listeners. Good morning, Folake. I'm here in the studio. Yeah, being women's math, I think it's quite critical that there's two schools of thought that I would like to bring into the fore. Firstly, the brain is structured. It's naturally structured. Being naturally structured, but also there's the number two fact that you have actually highlighted. We are exposed to different environments, and that then determines how we process the information that we then use. Now, it's the same concept. I would like, before we even go to the science of it, I would like to go back to the social strata so that we understand why certain conclusions have been drawn. I think I went into the mining sector just to do a research to find out exactly what is going on. I think we focused on a particular area in Matebela in South, which is a deep mining area. We realized that there's a lot of movement of people into the mining areas from different societies. And when they get to the place, they start digging for gold. And when they make money, these are men now. They are digging for gold. When they make money, the first thing they want to do is to probably show off, because it's a shock for them to get such monies into their hands. And their main targets become to satisfy their pleasures. And the target are the schoolgirls. So you realize that in mining areas, and if you go to the schools, you realize that a lot of young girls actually fall prey. They become addicts themselves. They become wives at a very early age. They become girlfriends at a very young age. And there's a lot of probably decay of moral fiber in those areas. You look at places like in the rural areas, the townships, they are a trap for the young girls. So the social structure, before we even go into the actual science in the body, is against them. Because anyone that makes money, the target is the young girls. Yeah. You go to the universities, it's the same concept.
Yeah. So for these young girls that you're describing in the mining sector, yes, are they then starting to use drugs because the male counterpart that you've just described is already using drugs, or how does the drug then get to these young girls?
Okay, thank you. You see, the drugs in the mining sector are so most of the informal miners use the drugs as a tool for probably just to harden themselves. That's why you see there's lots of accidents in the informal sector, because they take unnecessary risks because they'll be high. They'll take certain drugs, they can take the alcohols, they can take any of that as a tool, actually as a crutch to use in terms of their activities. So in other words, because they are users themselves, the chances are the girls that they go out with, they may end up being users themselves. And obviously being young actually exposes them to drugs that their bodies can't handle. So it becomes easier for them to become addicts at a very early age. And they become addicts faster than even the guys, because the guys have developed tolerance levels to the drugs that they use on a daily basis.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more around that. We will come back to the question I've asked you about our brains. Are men and women's brains different, especially in the context that we're having? You also talk about, the young girls, the females developing substance use disorders faster than men or the male counterpart. What does that mean?
Sorry, you can come again?
You were just describing just now how the girl child or the females within these communities or this societal structure are more likely then to develop substance use disorder faster than the men.
Yes.
So
right. What I mean is, here is a girl. She's 15. And here is a man that has been using drugs over and over again as a tool in terms of working. This girl is 15. Suddenly she gets exposed to, say, cannabis for the first time. Now, what happens is this brain is still developing, and the brain of a human develops up to probably mid-20s. So in other words, when you expose this girl to the drugs at an early age, now this is an overdose for starters, because the brain is not ready to process this. Secondly, that exposure, what it means is she experiences what she has never experienced. And it may be pleasurable. She's taken into a world where she has never been there. And it's easy. Biochemically, it's easier. Like you have said, we are wired differently. We are definitely wired differently. This is why, in terms of, if we zero on cannabis intake, cannabis takes a longer time to develop addiction. Why? Because this is a plant. This is a natural plant.
All right.
Right.
All right, I'll come back to you, Dr. Dewa. Tonight, just picking up from what Dr. Dewa is talking about as he's describing some of the environmental factors that are adding to young girls becoming addicted to substances. As a social worker in your work, how would you say, for example, some of the societal expectations are actually contributing to young women and girls starting to use substances?
All right, thank you for that. There's difference in socialization. I think now things have changed. Back then, it used to be a taboo, or rather very unusual, to see a woman holding alcohol or taking alcohol. But these days, we have normalized it. I think last week, I was in Monjoro at a growth point. I was really shocked to see that more women were actually taking alcohol more than men. It was a shock of my life, because I know that when it comes to rural areas, they're still the custodians of our cultural and customary systems. But things have changed. I don't know if the socialization has taken a different toll or different turn, but what I know is that men and women, they have different expectations. Normally, it's easier to identify a woman that has gone astray or someone who is now been hooked to substance and drug use, unlike when it comes to men. Men is just, that's how they are, it's their behavior. But for women, you can easily identify, because there are certain rules and expectations that they have to partake. You can see from childcare responsibilities, from household and chores, you can see now that there's a very big difference. Unlike with men. Men can just wake up and do their thing. They would, even childcare responsibilities.
So speaking even to the idea of gender roles themselves, are they contributing from what you are seeing in any way towards women actually using addiction? I want us to come back a little bit later to what you were describing, Mondoro, but just speaking to what you just said there about roles, those are gender roles. Women being caregivers, the custodians of our culture. From what you are saying, are any of these gender roles playing a role in women actually starting to use substances?
Certainly, the roles can also play a very big part. Like Dr. Deo was just alluding to, we have a teenage girl and versus someone maybe at my age around 20s, 28, late 20s, and I am now working, I am earning something, and because women, naturally they were dependent on the men as the providers, I can easily influence this young lady to get hooked into drugs because I have the money. And if we look at power struggles there, I can easily manipulate her to take substances. So yes, gender roles, they do have some
a role that they're
contribution.
playing, right?
Yeah.
And so, from what you've seen in Mondoro and maybe Dr. Dewa, also what you've also experienced in these mining communities, how then are these girls or the young women having access to actually buy whatever it is they're taking, whether it's the alcohol, whether it's the cocaine or marijuana? How are they accessing these things?
Mostly it's through their male counterparts. Yeah.
Kukanasipo not kana ari kubasa ka uri kubasa nditi kana ari mukorokoza, for example, there might be a period that they're not there. So how are they accessing these things?
From my experience, I don't think women struggle to access these unlike men, because if they go to a particular gathering where there is alcohol and other drugs, it's easier for them to access them, unlike men. For men, you have to have money. For women, it's just their presentation. That's the difference.
Is it that simple for us as women?
It is.
Is it?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. 0719-100-404. We're just trying to understand a little bit more about addiction in our young women. I'm sure you've been hearing accounts from Dr. Dewa from Tendai and how they've witnessed substance abuses in different communities, and as they're laying the foundation as to how young women and girls are affected differently by the substances that they've been taking. We're also throwing at you statistics as well that's proving that women and men are not only responding in terms of behavior, but certainly it's doing something different to the brain. Doc, I'm going to come back to you again as we're moving through our conversation, because we've also heard things like trauma being one of the reasons why someone may take addiction, and they say trauma in women is usually higher. Even the example that you've given, it could be in gender-based situations, gender-based violence situations. I wanted to check with you, Doc, looking at the brain. Are men and women's brains different as far as responding to addiction?
Thank you. Like I said in the beginning, the brains function differently in terms of the chemical actions, because a woman is identified as a woman because the system is different from the man. For starters, we're talking about the estrogen. I think if we talk about estrogen, I think we have seen, even physiologically, the essence of estrogen in the body of a woman. And we have seen at certain times, you have got an emotional response to the estrogen in terms of the release of the estrogen at certain times. What do we see in the presentation? We see mood swings, we see all those factors. What does it mean to someone that is looking? There is chemical reactions that are happening to the woman that are very specific to the woman, that will not be specific to a man. So what it means is we are structured differently for the purpose for which we are structured. Now, I would like to put it in very simple terms. I think I always want to communicate, not to complicate. Right. Why is it like that? Now, let's say we introduce the drug. In the backdrop of other chemical reactions, you realize when you drop the drug, now it depends on the stage in which that patient is in. Now, when you drop the drug, it comes in with its own chemical reactions in the body, and there's already chemical reactions that are taking place. Now, there's a competition for that. Now, if you realize the woman is trying to cope with certain reactions, and here it is, a drug comes into play. You realize that comes as a relief. I hope you understand what I'm talking about. She's at a certain stage in estrus, and then what happens is there's a drug that has come into place. So obviously she has got discomforts and everything else at that stage. And then there is a drug that comes and relieves that. What happens is it becomes addictive easily, because it's now a relief from the pains that someone is going through, from the traumas that she's going through. So it becomes a tonic, obviously. because I want to take care of what I always feel at a specific time. Yeah.
All right. So I want to come to Edmo. Edmo, as a recovery coach, statistics are also pointing that 80% of women who are battling with addiction have been in some sort of traumatic setup, whether it's in childhood, relationship. How does this impact their recovery, would you say, Edmo?
All right. Thanks, Falaki, and morning to our listeners and everybody here. It does affect. I want to first comment on what we've spoken about before we talk about the girls in the mines and whatnot. I've worked in the mines, and it's. I want to say, as a society, I think we've let down young girls and women in that fact, because we've always assumed that men are the ones that are affected by drugs, men are the ones that take drugs. But in actuality, there might have been a time when it was predominantly a men era in that sense. But now I want to tell you, for example, the ladies that go to the mines, sometimes they stand in the streets at night. Winter, it's cold. So taking drugs sometimes is not necessarily a pleasurable thing. It's a coping mechanism. Right.
For them to stand in the cold.
Exactly, stand in the cold. And for Lucky, they go through horrendous things. Things that are done to them during that time. People are high, it's in the mines, they're doing rituals, etc. They go through horrendous things where for you to cope, for you to be able to wake up the next day and operate, you need to be high on this. Which then shifts it to say drugs are affecting girls more, because for her to then get up and say, I'm going now to work, she takes those drugs.
Right.
Then she gets used to them, she's now dependent on it, and now she's associating whatever she's doing. Then when we look at them, we're like, the uyu. But actually, you don't know the backstory. So, as a society, I think we've let down the girl child, because we're so used to being a reactional community where we react to when guys are now taking drugs. But at that time when girls were seen to be not taking drugs, that's when we should have reacted to stop that pattern.
Because in Nyaya, like you're explaining, is not it sounds like the drug is not the issue. The other, as Dr. De was also highlighting, and I think that's also what Tendai was highlighting, the other factors around the addiction.
What you do to X, you do to Y. And in the situation when we saw that boys are taking drugs, let's say that time boys were taking drugs, and we're saying girls were not, we were supposed to treat them the same, such that the girl doesn't catch up to the boy, right? Then we were supposed to anticipate situations that might let the girl start taking drugs.
So let's talk about treating them the same, because that's exactly what this conversation is about, where we are saying treatment methods have been treating both men and women the same, and yet they are not the same.
Okay, so when I say treating them the same, I'm saying react the same in giving assistance. Right. Do not say we're giving assistance to boys only because we know boys as the ones that are taking drugs. Right. Give them both assistance, but have tailor-made assistance for their situations. With guys, with girls, given what we've been talking about, the estrogen and the gender roles are quite. It's also quite another thing where we know girls sometimes have daddy issues, things have happened to them, all that trauma. Now addressing that question, all those traumas, things have been done to them that you don't know about.
So how do we bring in now the idea of addressing the trauma, this girl who's standing in the middle of the night in the mining community, like you were saying, how then does this come up in the treatment? How does this impact their recovery?
Okay, basically what we need to do is open up to them. Find a way that's safe. Right, we've been trying to do that. Find a way that's safe, that you approach, get into them. As a recovery coach, I'm a lived experience. Right, the systems that we use, you don't just approach someone when you're not in the space where drugs are being used, when you don't understand what's done. You don't just approach someone and think you can help them without understanding them. You'd be on a higher horse. But understand their world, get into their world, explain to them what's going on, then maybe you can give assistance.
It's 0719-100-404. As you're listening into these conversations, Dr. Dewa, you said what part of the world was that you were in?
It was in Matebele and South.
In Matebele,
Eskodini,
where we are hearing first-hand accounts of Tendai, of Dr. Dewa, and what, as well as Ed Moore, of how they've seen young girls starting to take drugs and substances. I want to check with you, as far as you can tell, because most of the time we've just said and things like that. Do you think there could be trauma-informed approaches we can actually use to support these women and young girls in recovery? 0719 100 404. Murtha, I know you're listening in on as we're having this conversation. You are also one person who understands trauma and its impact on people. Just now we were sharing a statistic that says 80%, that's 4 out of every 5 women who are taking drugs because of trauma, because of trauma. So how do you think we should have trauma-informed approaches towards recovery, specifically for women in our treatments and therapy?
Good morning, Folake, and good morning, team in the studio. Good morning, listening. This issue about trauma is a very tricky issue because we tend to look at trauma in very different ways. Now, when we talk about trauma, we're not just talking about abuse that the girl has gone through. We're also talking about concepts in the sense that things are changing, and that change is actually confronting some of the things that we hold valuable. So when someone comes and challenges something that you strongly hold to be of worth to you, regardless of the information being provided, the fact that it's challenging what you hold can actually cause you trauma. So what we need to understand here, I don't know if you remember when we had the Me Too movement, and there was quite a lot of women that came out and joined the Me Too movement saying, me too, these things happen to me too. So one thing we also then have to understand from that perspective is a lot of women have gone through a lot of abuse under the guise of patriarchy and the level of oppression that had. Now, what you also then find is the patriarchy concept actually placed a male at the top, but without necessarily giving him the skills that he required to navigate that top. So what then happens from that is he doesn't know what he's doing up there. So he's basically causing a lot of difficulties for people under him. So these are some of the frustrations that you find in a lot of people. A lot of people go through a lot of hardship. So you've got both the men and the women going through a lot of strife because of misguided systems that we have. Now, when it comes to drug abuse, you then find that people are trying their best to navigate through these frustrations, these traumatic experiences, and these hardships that they find themselves in on a regular basis. They don't know how to deal with the stress of the day-to-day situations. They don't know how to navigate and know how they're going to get over a hurdle that they have. So instead of fighting, they just basically choose the easier route to say.
I want to ask a question right there, Murtha, what you just said. Apana munhu wakagara pano kubvira mazuva aAdam naEve asinambosangana nezvigozhero. Adam naEve kuzori kana vakutaura nenyoka yaifamba kuzoika varya muchero. Zvaitovawo zvigozhero zvavakasangana nazvo dzikanga vadzingwa mugarden paya. It's consistent with humankind. So what's made the time we're living different in as far as facing difficulties? Vanamai nana baba vedu nana sekuru akaenda kuhondo nguva iyoyo yanga yakagozha mufunge. But it seems as if now the prevalence of addiction, of substance use disorder is much higher now. From beginning of time in terms of challenges, because challenges have always been there. Hardships are part of human nature, are they not? And I'm also asking you, if you're also listening in, how you process this idea of challenges and how they are leading to the uprising figures we're seeing in terms of addiction.
So it's very, very critical that you brought that angle to the discussion, because you'd probably find as we go, we're looking at a downward trajectory when it comes to how we are functioning as a people. If you look back, we had systems that were better structured or better functioned in a way that helped us to understand what will happen if this happens. But the more the further we go, we start to realize that those structures have fallen sideways. So there isn't much of a structure, there isn't much of reassurance to say, if something goes wrong, I know somewhere where I can get a reprieve. So these are the issues that are now getting worse and worse as life goes on.
Got you.
So,
0719 100 If you're also listening into this discussion, I suppose the question also applies to you. What is it that's having us see a rise in substance use disorders in 2024 than any other time? And yet difficulties, challenges have always been there from the beginning of time. 0719 100 Do you agree with Mertha that indeed there's been a disruption in support mechanisms that would have made it easier for you to handle any challenges that you're having? Mertha, I know you've also been experiencing, as somebody who is an advocate in mental health, you've been seeing conditions that are co-occurring with addiction, particularly in women. In fact, statistics are saying you are most likely to find a woman who's going to have a co-occurring disorder. So for example, if she's battling with addiction, she's probably going to suffer from depression, anxiety, or even trauma or bipolar or whatever condition. Why do you think that is? But in a Zimbabwean context, what do you think is the most common health condition that we are seeing with addiction in women?
So when we look at addiction, it's classified under what is considered Axis 2 on if you're looking at it from the DSM diagnostic manual. What that says basically is it's not necessarily a clinical presentation, but it's more intertwined with more personality type issues. And what you then find is when you get into the personality issue, you're actually looking at a more complex type of problem that, say, for example, someone who's had anxiety for many years, for it to become a personality issue, they start to identify themselves with their anxiety. So they start to say things like, I'm just an anxious person. Take me as I am. So those are some of the things that you find with most of our addicts. They start to identify themselves as drinkers. I also like the way Alcoholics Anonymous goes. You have to introduce yourself as an alcoholic. You cannot separate your problem from your personality. So these are some of the complications that we also need to look at and help people to understand that addiction is a personality difficult type problem. Something has been going on for a long time for someone to get to that point where they start to say, look, I've got to do this. I know it's harmful. I know it's probably going to kill me and hurt other people, but I've got to do this for my survival.
Got you.
So,
it's Capital 100.4 FM, Harare's Habit. We're looking at some of the key trends that have been highlighting that women are more likely to use drugs to cope with emotional pain or trauma. Statistics are suggesting that men are more likely to use drugs for recreational purposes instead, and women are more likely to experience things like anxiety, things like depression, alongside them taking drugs. Studies are also suggesting that it is important for us to understand the differences between the sexes so that we can actually develop effective treatment and support systems for individuals who are struggling with addiction. And as you may know, it is Women's Month in South Africa as well, and we've just come from the African Union's Women's Day, which was 31 July, and the theme is looking at investing in women, accelerate progress. Well, I've summarized it. And we're just trying to understand, how does investing in women accelerate progress towards addiction treatment as well as recovery, whether it's education, whether it's gender equality, but also how does empowering our women lead to better outcomes for all? And we were hearing earlier Edmo saying he feels we've actually failed young women and girls. Do you agree with that? That right now, as we are sitting there, we have failed these young women who are finding themselves gaining access to substances through male counterparts that they are meeting, particularly in mining communities, growth points, as Tendai was also highlighting. Tendai, I want to come back to you as somebody who's also working day to day with recoveries, with people battling addiction. I wanted to understand from you, we're understanding that women are likely to end up suffering from depression, anxiety, and sometimes they'll even have suicidal tendencies. Why is it that women who are presenting in addiction are going to have higher rates of depression, anxiety, and suicidal tendencies?
I would say the bi-directional influence is here at play. It's either the drug is induced those issues, or the person was taking the drug to address those issues, the presenting issues. Mm-hmm. For example, these days there has been a very, very topical wave of munjolo. Yeah, vanhu vari kurwadzisana out there, and someone arambwa schools zvisati zvizviri kuitika, hapana kana closure, and they sink into depression. And because of certain engagements nadzo, maybe they have been exposed to alcohol before. The brain still keeps a record of whichever coping mechanism yakamboshandisa before. Kana munhu akamboaddress anxiety or depression or any issues with alcohol, the brain, in order to get back to that coping mechanism, they end up vakushandisa alcohol. Alcohol needs a depressant. And whichever drug yanokwanisa kushandisa, either ashandisa a stimulant, even akaita that high euphoric effect, when it wears off, achadzokera futi in a state of depression. So it can also enhance.
Yeah. Also, you were speaking earlier about women that you saw at Mondoro that shocked you and surprised you. Because zitakakura tichiziva kuti zvitakwa kazhinji havasi vanhukadzi ndo vanenge vakamese muri kugutsurira sevanhurume nai vanhukadzi ndo vanenge vari soba, vanhurume ndo vatowanza kuona vakadhakwa. Speaking to some of these ideas that we have, good old-fashioned ideas about women's roles, how is this coming into how we then diagnose and treat mental health issues? I'm also imagining you're not the only one. Akashamisika kuna vakadzi vava vamwe vakatoti shidakwa, and all sorts of words may be, spewing on these women who may be battling mental health issues in that space, and they are manifesting through them drinking alcohol, for example. And then this is just me assuming, I was not there. So how do you think some of these old age fashion ideas we have actually then affect how we are not only diagnosing, but how we are treating women who are suffering with mental health issues?
All right, thank you for that question. Whenever you are presented with the two different cases, one involving a male and the other one involving a female, you need to understand the extent to which the society accept these presenting issues. Yesterday I was in another WhatsApp group, and someone was asking, why do we have a lot of males by Recreational Maria more than females? It's because the society is ready to accept a male person who struggles with a drug addiction than a female. So whenever you are handling these different cases, you need to understand kuti uyu wechikadzi atori nema issues of stigma and labeling before matanga kudilani another issue. So pamunozotanga ku dig onto those traumas and all that, first you need to understand that these people in the society, they are viewed and perceived differently, even though one is the same problem. But the society is ready to point fingers at a woman.
Kuti
But,
vakadzi
we are
pagrowth
Africa.
point vari kumwa dora ava.
So interventions should start from that onset. It was already now these are different cases.
With 4 minutes before we go to the news, we're going to leave the conversation here. Do you also agree that maybe that's another reason why, despite the fact that statistics are suggesting that women are actually whom we need to be worried about in terms of supporting in treatment and rehabilitation, that may not be on the ground? Do you agree that some of these stereotypes we hold might actually be making it more difficult? Next week, when we continue this discussion, we're going to pick it up from a point where we then answer. So how can we create more supportive, more inclusive environment for women's health? And we also want to establish, do these rehab centers themselves hold some biases when they are also treating, recognizing, as well as diagnosing mental health issues in women? For today, this is all we have for you for Detox. Remember also for you, if you are someone who is battling with addiction or someone you feel might be struggling with addiction, we always leave you with 3 important C's for you to think about as indicators that indeed your special someone or yourself might also need some help. Do you find yourself struggling with compulsive behavior? You need to get drugs. And remember, we've also established drugs are not just substances. It could be your food, it could be your porn, it could be even things like exercise. Do you find yourself having cravings? And do you find yourself continuing to want to watch porn, to browse social media, to eat, even when you know that this behavior has got negative consequences? And also, is it possible that perhaps you are now unable to cut back or to stop using that thing or doing that behavior? Do you feel as if you've lost control? If any of these are true for you, are present in the person you're concerned about, you might want to consider that they are struggling with addiction or a substance use disorder. And also, do you feel ashamed or guilty after doing this? Doc, how do we get a hold of you?
My number is 0777 579 121. And if you just on the net, you just go for International Wellness Center, you will find us there.
And Tendai, how to get a hold of you?
All right, you can get in touch with me with from our telehealth number, which is 062 379 751. I will answer to that one, yeah.
And Mertha, lastly but in no way least, how do we also get a hold of you as a psychotherapist?
I'm on 0775 483 749 at Insight Wellbeing.
And this is where we are leaving it today.